Hey guys, it's Nick. My project is about generalized quantifiers and intonation. So we'll start by talking about what those are. I will give you some examples right now of quantifiers. So here are some examples of quantifiers. We see a few cats, 2 cars, the one and only bling bling. Now actually, one is tempted to say that the quantifier here is a few, but following the treatment given in Barwise and Cooper's paper, Generalized Quantifiers in Natural Language, we actually take this whole noun phrase to be the quantifier, not just a few. The same applies here. This is not the quantifier, this is the quantifier. And in the third case as well, this would be not the quantifier, the whole noun phrase is the quantifier. Now this is known as a quantificational determiner. And these are important to note because they're the phrases we're going to end up using in our command search to find the relevant utterances. Okay, but then there's also the question, what is intonation? So that refers to, as far as I can tell, any accenting of pitch, whether it's on a single syllable, a single phoneme, or even a word in a sentence. For example, I didn't give her the flowers, versus if you read it completely monotone, I didn't give her the flowers. And there's clearly some sort of difference there. What is the difference? And this is closely related to something known as focus, which I will point you at the board now. For all intents and purposes, I think you can probably think of focus as a linguistic theory of italics, although perhaps it's more complicated than that. What it does, or what it tries to explain, is that some information in certain sentences can be more salient than other information. So, like in that sentence I just said, I didn't give her the flowers, it almost insinuates like, no, I didn't give her the flowers, I gave it to him or someone else that wasn't the referent of that pronoun. And so I did try to do a search on the Yukon Library database on all of these keywords, focus, intonation, and quantifiers, and I tried different combinations of them, and I did not find much for quantifiers and intonation themselves. Actually, if you use those 2 keywords, the Yukon Library search, I think on LLBA returns nothing. And so that kind of leads me to my question, what is the relationship between quantifiers and intonation? And I found an article by Marek Boguslaw, 1992, about focus and intonation, and it gave some of the history of this sort of interplay, research on this topic, and that it's not always purely semantic. There's syntactic accounts as well, pragmatic semantics that doesn't involve so much pragmatics. And I also found this paper by Mats Ruth, which talks specifically about intonational focus. And focus in on this phrase, intonational focus. Like, here's a question. Does intonation always indicate focus? So like if a word is accented by a pitch, does it necessarily have focus on it? And conversely, can we have the focus without intonation? For example, can you read a completely monotone sentence and still have some information be more salient than others? Now for the second question, perhaps Ruth's account in this paper from 1996 places some emphasis in his conclusion section on metrical focus. He says the metrical focus, referring to like meter, the patterns of stress in the syllables, da 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 da, stuff like that, is actually more prominent for determining whether focus is present. And so these are tricky questions to answer in general, but for the relationship between quantifiers and intonation, I have a guess that quantifiers tend to be intonated more often than not. My hypothesis, I'll now write it down. My hypothesis is that 75% of quantifiers are intonated at least a minor third interval. And this is something, minor third, that we can measure straight from the frequencies and the ratios of frequencies that we get. So I would like to note that the parameters in this hypothesis can be tweaked to strengthen or weaken it. In particular, the probability can be raised or lowered, and the interval can also be made larger or smaller. So as a possible null hypothesis, I've come up with 15% or more of quantifiers have intonation within a minor third range, as opposed to saying at least 75% of quantifiers are intonated at least a minor third interval. So I tried to negate what I have here to get this. Moving to the actual methods, so I use the providence corpus, which you can see here, because it has the audio and the video transcripts that I can use in conjunction with CLAN. And so once I have the relevant directory set, I can run this command, which uses the quantificational determiners from before. It looks for all instances of those words uttered by the child in all of their transcripts, and it puts it into a file called utterances.cha or what have you. And once I have those, I'll systematically go through and I note which transcript they occur in. And once I have all that done, I open the transcripts one by one, and I locate the relevant utterances, and I get about 1 second around each of them in time, just to make sure I have it all. And I'll export it into Pratt. And then I can look at the actual audio details, like the frequency. So if this was the utterance here, I could look at the frequency. I could look at the highest point and the lowest point, and I could look what those frequencies are. And I take the ratio and see, is it bigger than 6/5? And if so, then they are at least a minor third apart. And if not, then they are not. So this gives me a concrete way to test whether the quantifiers are intonated a certain amount or not. I am doing something very specific for each utterance, so there is some uniformity to it. However, it is still pretty tedious, so I'm not done yet. I'll let you know how it goes.